Okay, the topic for today is DNA in genealogical research. Now, I've attacked this a couple of times before, and I will say for those of you who are new, you can find a recording of the previous ones on our website, oakmontgenclub.org. But those were more sophisticated. This is a fairly simple one. I think the idea is to just get ourselves into the topic and really see where it takes us. So starting with the most basic, DNA is a double helix. It is a very important molecule in life, and the double helix is constructed of half of it coming from your father and half of it coming from your mother. It was discovered by Watson, Crick, and Franklin in the early 50s. And it's very straightforward. Each of us have 23 pairs of chromosomes, which make up the DNA in that classic structure. The woman has an egg, an ovum, into which she has 23 chromosomes. The man has a sperm, 23 chromosomes. When those come together, they create the 23 pairs that become you. So the whole study has to do with the idea that we're looking at these 23 pairs of chromosomes and finding how you relate to other people. There is one chromosome that is different. Chromosome 23, your mom has two X chromosomes. Men have an X and a Y chromosome. So if you become a woman, it's because you got the X from your mom, one of the X's, and the only X from your dad. If you become a son, it's because you got one of your mom's X's and the Y from your dad. In addition to the chromosomes, in your cell, there are what are called mitochondria. And the mitochondria DNA is what instructs the cell about how to behave, how to replicate, all sorts of things about what the cell does.
George, do you want us to be seeing your PowerPoint? We just only see the initial opening one.
Okay, that's a mistake. So we're going to go back. Let's try it one more time. Thank you. Okay, can you see that one? This would be the chromosome and the cell.
Oh.
No?
Just a blank screen, black, which says you started screen sharing, but
Okay.
not
I'll
there.
have to try something else here. Thank you very much for catching that. I may have it now. How about now?
No, it just still says you started screen sharing, but we're not seeing the PowerPoint.
We're going to fix this. How about now?
No. You know, up by your picture, it says the Oakmont Sunday Symposium. So I don't know if that's confusing anything or not.
Well, the only possible confusion is I am on a different device than I normally use because I'm traveling. Now somewhat frustrated.
Yeah, I see that.
Do we say aloha, George?
You can say aloha.
Yeah. It did show the opening one where you had the date and the name, but when you kept talking, if you were clicking and moving it, it did not move. It didn't go to the next slide. So it showed the first one.
George, when you're starting to share, does it have you pick which screen you want to share? Are you maybe picking the wrong screen?
I don't think so.
Still blank.
There you
It
go.
Now-
is.
There
Okay,
we
got
go.
it.
Yay.
You got the DNA double helix.
Yes.
Okay, you got the egg being fertilized.
Yes.
Okay,
This
and you
is-
got the XY for dad and mom.
Yes.
And here is the cell. So where I was cutting in was in the cell there are what are called mitochondria. And the mitochondria contain DNA. And the fascinating thing about the mitochondria DNA is each of us gets this solely from our mother. So the result of that is we have these 23 pairs, but the Y DNA, okay, I got mine from my father, who got his from his father, who got his from his father, you follow? So that becomes a paternal line that goes back forever. And other than changes which are unexpected, sometimes the DNA modifies, you can go back many generations. And so there have been a lot of studies of families based on looking at Y DNA. But similarly, any child, male or female, okay, gets their mitochondria from their mother, who only got hers from her mother, from her mother, from her mother. So again, mitochondrial DNA is a unique way of following back your mother's line. So two diversions. Obviously, if you're a woman, you don't have Y DNA, but you may have a brother, you may have a paternal uncle, and they would have the same male DNA as your father. So you can follow the line back if you can convince one of them to do a Y DNA test. And in the case of the mitochondria, I have my mother's DNA, therefore I can follow her line, but I can't follow my father's mother's line. She is my paternal grandmother. But if I can find someone who's descended from one of my father's sisters, or a father's sister herself, then I get to do that. The history is surprisingly recent. The first successful DNA test to identify a criminal was in 1987. And we see that all the time now in TV crime movies. In 2000, Family Tree DNA began to offer Y DNA and mitochondrial DNA tests. And that's when I started doing my first DNA. In 2005, National Geographic started a test, which is now, they have killed the project, but what they were doing was called the genographic test to test ethnic background. So they would get a bunch of people to all submit their DNA, and then they would look at them and say, gee, all of these people live in Poland and they share common DNA, therefore we can look at the ethnic background associated with Polish. 2007, 23andMe offered the first what's called autosomal DNA. Now, autosomal is where you look at all the rest of the DNA, not just the Y and the mitochondria. Now, 23andMe was founded not to to do genealogical research, but it was founded to identify whether you carried genetic modifications with medical implications. We won't go there today, but it's a very interesting company. Now, today, over 50 million people have been tested, most for autosomal DNA, 15 million at Ancestry, and 13 million at 23andMe. And the one thing about the 23andMe, because it was not founded for genealogical purposes, a much smaller fraction of people at 23andMe have interest in tracing their genealogy. So what is autosomal DNA? Let's look at three couples in the top line. And the various colors, the one on the left is meant to represent the male, and the one on the right, the female part of each person's DNA. So that gives some colors we can follow through. So we now have a male child from the first couple, a female child from the second couple. They marry and they have a female child. We then have on the right-hand side, a couple that have a girl. She marries a son of the first couple, of the second couple, and they have a male child. And those two are now what are compared. So when you do your DNA test, they're going to be looking at little tiny segments of DNA. And here you can see that there's this little tiny orange segment that this child has, the grandchild of couples 1 and 2, and this same little segment that this child has, the grandchild of 2 and 3, and that's the IBD, identical by descent. So the whole nature of this is to find those segments. So how do you get your DNA? If you have not done it, you purchase a test kit. Most companies have frequent sales. Recently, Ancestry, which is normally $99, was selling kits for $59. Most tests involve a swab in the mouth, seal it in a tube, mail it to the company, and you get your results. Almost all the companies give you the top line results, meaning who do you match? But they also have more sophisticated services, and in order to get those, you sometimes have to be a subscriber. So let's look at what Ancestry DNA does. You submit your DNA data. They compare it to their entire database, 15 million people. And when they find a possible match, they estimate the relationship. So here is my DNA. Okay. Oh, this actually is Marie's, but so from Ancestry, you get an ethnicity estimate, and each of these companies gives you an ethnicity estimate. Now, when they say that, that is based on the idea that they have sampled people who currently live in these places. And they're comparing your DNA to those people. So when it says, for example, 29% of Marie's ethnic background is French, okay, that ties into the fact that people in France and she share a fair amount of DNA. So then you have the DNA match list. Who are the people that she has DNA matches with? And they have a special service they call Through Lines that you have to be a subscriber to see. We're not going to spend time with that today. So let's start with the ethnicity estimate. So this is Marie's. Marie's family is half French Canadian and half Polish. Her father was French Canadian, her mother Polish. So what you can see here is 29% matches France, 26% Eastern Europe and Russia. That Russia is this enormous big green thing. There's this little section down here, which is what was called an area of Poland called Lumza, which we happen to know her grandmother was from. 25% from the Baltics. That's mostly Lithuania, which is where her grandfather was from. And then a bunch of stuff that's Scotland, England, Sweden, and Norway. And it is important to remember that these areas intermingle DNA. Okay, the Vikings left DNA all over the world. So when you get DNA in Scotland, it may easily be from Brittany or from Norway. So looking at my DNA matches, this is the top line of them. So that's my daughter, okay? High amount of DNA match, okay? This is my mother, who before she passed did a DNA test, so I have her in my list. And boy, if you've got an older generation of somebody that you can go to, get them to do a DNA test because it gives you a lot of information. This is David Beaumont, who's my first cousin, and David may be on the call. I saw David be on the call. And we share a fair amount of information. Now, I'm looking at something here. Okay, so if we go back, we're talking this funny thing called CMs. A CM is nothing more than an analytical method used by the people who do DNA testing to analyze the degree of your link. So they are called centimorgans. They are fairly literally not meaningful. So you don't have to understand them, just know it's an analytical method they use. However, if you want to try and understand them, okay, here's what you do. So if you don't want to be to overdose on technology, you can whistle for the next 30 seconds. Each chromosome is associated with some subcategories called single nucleotide polymorphisms, abbreviated SNP and called SNPs. So what the DNA analysis companies do is they look for the SNPs in your DNA in areas that match other people's SNPs. The centimorgan is created when the SNPs in a sequence of DNA are known to change about every 100th generation. So there's a 1% chance of changing in one generation. So let's go back. You and I share the same grandparents. The probability my SNP has changed that I inherited from my grandfather, 90 is 2% chance of changing. 98% chance it's still the same. You inherited the same SNPs, same thing. So they can estimate a relationship by saying, boy, if you match a lot of those, particularly a lot in the same sequence, that's a pretty good chance you've got a relationship. So they started with around 6,800 SNPs. A parent or child, almost by definition, you'll match 3,400. Siblings, surprisingly, are not 3,400, they're 2,550. And then you get half siblings. We all have those. And so you can see that as you go through each generation, okay, it goes down. So let me look at first cousins, which is 850. And a half first cousin is 425, which is the same as you get for a first cousin once removed. So remember, a first cousin once removed, you're a first cousin, that means both of you share the same grandparents. Once removed means I'm matching against your child. That's what once removed means. And of course, third cousins, okay, are two children matching each other. So what you see is in dropping a generation, on one side, the link goes down by half. On both sides, okay, it goes down okay, so this is a chart that is on our website. It's a very important chart as you're doing DNA analysis. What it shows you is for literally thousands of people who submitted data, it shows you the range of link. So the range of link that showed up for first cousins, okay, which if you go back, we said first cousins were typically 850. Okay, first cousins here are a range of a low of 396 and a high of 1397 with an average of 866. So people submitted data. Now, it's very important to understand why the number isn't exactly the same. I inherited half of my mom's DNA. That meant she had DNA half from her father, half from her mother. But the half of her DNA I inherit is not necessarily half from her father and half from her mother. I could inherit 60% from her father and 40% from her mother. Because it's just random what I get. And out of those 23 chromosomes. So that's why the ranges here can be as wide as they are. And you can see they even have data for 6th, 7th, and 8th cousins. A lot of information here. Don't need to worry about it. The other thing they have here is halves. Half cousins, half siblings. Okay. And most of us in our genealogy can have come across, if not in our own personal life, in our ancestors' lives, many cases where there are second marriages and therefore we share a common paternal or maternal link, but not both. So we're going to take a look now at some actual DNA matches. So give me a second to pull up a chart here. Actually, this is a chance if anybody actually has something they want to share or want to yell at me about, this is a good time to do it.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I purchased from 23andMe, I purchased 2 kits, which also had the health component there. And I purchased them about 3 years ago. My husband did his, and I never got around to doing mine. Is that something that's still valid, or should I be, contacting the company? I don't know if they've changed their, the way that they've done things or been more sensitive.
Real quickly, 23andMe is constantly adding new information.
Okay.
So what they're doing is, and what happened to 23andMe was they started off with the idea that they could just look at your DNA and tell you that you might have cystic fibrosis, or you had a DNA modification that was common to people with cystic fibrosis.
Right.
But the FDA said, you can't tell people that. That's you're giving them medical information without having proven what you're doing. And those people went out and raised the money, did the tests, went back to the FDA and got permission to give medical information. So if you go to 23andMe today, they have a set of tests they do that relate changes to your DNA that may suggest the possibility of your having a particular medical problem. Okay, very few of the genetic modifications are gimmies, but there are a bunch of them that are pretty possible, and they're constantly getting new ones approved. So their information does change regularly. The test does not change.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Good. Thanks. Yeah. My son's just been diagnosed with MS. My sister had MS. So, I don't know if that's going to come up in the results, but.
Don't know, but it's worth pursuing. They also do, they go to the people who submitted DNA and they say, do you have this particular problem or is it in your family? As they're looking for new markers. Okay. But if they find them, they're not going to tell you right off. They're going to go to the FDA first.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So we're going to move over to, I can figure out how to get this where I want it. Okay.
George, haven't they also been blessed with some investigation going on through the NIH, the National Institute of Health?
Oh yeah. If in fact things are relatively proven, all they have to do is show the DNA, show that the FDA that they are accurately measuring the thing that has been proven. But just because the NIH has shown that there's a possible link does not mean the FDA has approved that being tested. Okay? Okay, so here's my DNA account. So I'm on Ancestry. I'm going to click on DNA and I click on DNA results. Okay, and here we have things. Okay, and we're going to go down to view all the matches, which we just did a second ago. Okay, now. Takes a minute for it to wake up. Okay, so Jean's my daughter. So for anybody in the DNA in my list, I can click, yes, I recognize this person. Okay, which side of the family is Jean on? Well, she's obviously on both sides. Okay, and then they show me possible relationships. Okay, and they say, well, the most likely one is she is your daughter. Okay, I can confirm that. And now my database in Ancestry changes permanently. I can change it again if I make a mistake. But she is now shown as on both sides of the family as a daughter. You can see down that my mother is on my mother's side. David Beaumont, my first cousin, is on my mother's side. Now we're going to go down to Charlotte Campbell. Charlotte is another first cousin. I recognize Charlotte. And she happens to be on my father's side. And they say, okay, here are some possible things she could be. Could be a first cousin, a grandmother, a grand aunt. And okay, I want to go back. Okay, father's side. Okay, and she is going to be a first cousin. And I'm going to confirm that. Okay, and you will see now, there she is as first cousin. Now, why do I do this? Well, I do this because in large part, now I can begin to see links between people that I have a known relationship with and people who are more distant. Okay, although in some cases, okay, now with Charlotte, okay, I can click on her name. And what it brings up at this point is her ancestry. This is her tree she put into the Ancestry. Okay, and she has two possible relationships. Would you believe we share the same grandfather and the same grandmother? Now remember, these are two different relationships because it's quite possible that you would find that we share the same grandfather, but that grandfather married again, and so we don't share the same grandmother. So let's view the relationship. This is in Ancestry. And here we have my grandfather, my father and his sister, okay, myself, and Charlotte, who is the daughter of my father's sister. Pretty good. Well, think about what I talked about with mitochondrial DNA, okay? My mitochondrial DNA comes from my mother. Charlotte's comes from her mother, which means it comes from her grandmother, who is my grandmother. Therefore, I sponsored Charlotte getting a mitochondrial DNA test so that I can use her mitochondrial DNA to do further tracking of people who are ancestors of my grandmother. Okay. Now, we're going to go back. You notice the little back button, I hope. Now, I can do a couple of things here. We added the relationship. I can add a note. Okay, so the note is Charlotte is Ollie McKinney Arnold's daughter and my first cousin. Okay, so this note is useful because later on, I may want to compare Charlotte with other people. And when I do that, I know who she is. For my first cousin, trivial. Time you get to third and fourth cousins, it becomes more complicated. Now, the other thing we can always do with Charlotte is we can look for what's called shared matches. Now, what this is other people in my database who match with Charlotte. Okay, my daughter does, that's obvious. Note that my mother does not, which is obvious because my mother is not a McKinney. She's not related to my father's family. Gun Plumber is, well, Gun Plumber is her brother. But then more people, this is, we know who this person is, Ida Bell's daughter. note that I put the note in here because Ida Bell, who is an Ashworth, okay, I would not know the name Schnurr just because I happen to know that she's Ida Bell's if I hadn't reminded myself. Okay, message sent. I now know who Zeke is. He happens to be Charlotte's nephew, but I didn't initially, so I sent him a message asking him to give me some more information. Here's another double second cousin. Okay. All right, now I want to go down to, okay, we're going to go to, okay, I want to go to a, back to my DNA.
George,
Yes,
do you then add these people to your tree if you don't have them there already?
absolutely. I mean, this is as good a piece of information as you can get. Okay. So, for example, with Mary Lynn Schnurr, okay, I'm going to give you an example later. Let's hold that thought process. Okay. But you add them because they begin to add names that you would not otherwise know. Okay. So we're back to my DNA matches, and I want to go down to NL Ross. So we're going to just keep going down till we get to NL Ross. Okay, here's NL Ross. Okay, so we can go through this process. I recognize NL Ross. NL Ross is on my mother's side. Okay. Actually, before I do that, I better look at the tree, shouldn't I? So I'm going to look at the tree. Okay. And NL Ross and I share great grandparents, James Madison Martin and Sarah Angelin Cox. His grandfather is Linville Pearl Martin. If we compare, mine is Lida Della Martin. I have a wonderful picture of Lida and Linville together, by the way. And Linville was a country violin player who actually got invited to play at the Grand Ole Opry. Okay, so he's a fun part of our family heritage. Okay, so we are clearly second cousins, share the same great grandfather and great grandmother. Okay, so let's go back. Okay, so we're at the relationship, mother's side. Okay, now here are some other, this one will have some other possible relationships. Lots of things. Notice the percentages go down so that it's possible this is a first cousin, third removed, but only 4% of the time is that true. But it's possible. It's shown up in the data. There was a second cousin, that one's pretty easy. Okay, I want to add a note. Okay, this is Linville Martin's grandson and my second cousin. Okay, so everybody sort of sees what I'm doing here. And yes, I would absolutely add this person to my database if they weren't there already. Okay, now there's something called here adding groups. You can create a group of people. These may be all people from the same village, or they may be all people from the same branch of the family. So you can put people in groups. You can also star people. I've starred people who I have a particular interest in. Okay, so all of the different methods, and Ancestry is not the only one, but all of them have the ability to do some kind of grouping and identification. Okay. 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 Now, I want to go back again, showing you how to use Ancestry, but all of them have very similar techniques. So when we look at all DNA matches, come on, back to all DNA matches, there are these little things at the top that are called filters. So I could say, you know, I only want to look at people where they know what the common ancestor is, who have trees that I could look at. Okay, so I do that. And this is all people who have trees who have common ancestors. So David has a tree, for example, so I could look at his. But I'm not going to, oh, and the trees, I only want public trees. Now, Ancestry, note here, some people have trees on Ancestry, but they don't let you go into them unless you get their permission. Other people do their DNA test, they have a tree on Ancestry, but they haven't linked the tree. So you have to go to their site and find the tree and look at it. We'll do that in a minute. Okay. Okay. So we can do sorting by relationship or by date. So let's say you've been doing this for a while, and what you're really interested in is the people that have come in more recently. So I could go by date. Okay, and fifth cousin, I'd look at that one maybe sometime. But here's one that's a second cousin, okay, that I have, and so interesting to take a look at that person. Sorry about this. Gotta get rid of that. Okay, so this is the person who recently came in, who has a tree. Okay, and I'm told we have this possible relationship through Samuel Mitchell McKinney, my great-grandfather. Okay, so I'm not going to worry about going into that today, but you can see what kind of information we're getting. Okay, and if you looked at these names over here, the truth of the matter is I don't have these names. Okay, Akers is a name. That's probably where the link is. So I really need to go through a whole process to add these names into my database. Okay. And just as a note, if I had some confusion or wanted to talk to this person, I could message them. Click on message. Come on back. There we go. Okay.
George,
Yes.
when you, on the far right, when it says, do you recognize them? Does learn more mean, no, I don't, or yes, I do, I just want to learn more?
I just clicked on learn more. Okay. So what it does with learn more is give you some information on him that you might want to look at.
I see. Okay.
So so learn more basically means I'm not yet ready to add the relationship.
I see.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
And you get the same thing. You get the same thing if you click on his name. Okay.
George, just out of curiosity, how far back have you gone with, you know, like fifth cousins or further back?
It's a complex topic, but covered very simply. I have gone back to seventh great grandparent. Okay, so that's what that's a seventh cousin. But in doing that, you have to understand that out of all of your seventh generation ancestors, you're probably going to still only be matching DNA with like 10% of their descendants, because it keeps getting, diluted and diluted and diluted. So I may have a lot of DNA from my sixth great grandfather, okay, on one side, but not from another. So unlike grandparents, you're almost guaranteed to have grandparents and great grandparents and great great grandparents DNA. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So you may be able to go back further. When you can, we're going to talk in a minute about some of the tricks of understanding whether that's accurate or not. Okay. Now, the really sophisticated DNA junkies begin to look at where on each of those 23 chromosomes the matches occur. And they claim they can go down to a much finer tune than any of these companies do commercially. And Ancestry will not track you, Dak, beyond a fifth great grandparent. Okay. So I'm going to get rid of the common ancestors part for the moment. I'm going to do search. So if you go to search, you can put in the name of the person who did the DNA. So I could put in Regina Duchesne's test. Okay, I want to go back and sort this by DNA. Now, I could put in, for example, David Beaumont here, and that would pull up his record. Or I can search for a surname that's in somebody's tree, or a location where they might have been born. So we're going to search for Vaughn. Yeah. How about a V? Okay. Now with Vaughn, I'm going to include similar surnames. And that's because my Vaughn family sometimes put an A between the H and the N and sometimes didn't. So I don't know. So we're going to do that and see what we get. So these are people who have Vaughn in their trees. Okay, well, obviously my parents do, and David does, because it's the same family. Let's go on down. I want to get to Martha Perrin. Maybe maybe I'll search for Martha. All right, so we're good for Martha Perrin, P-E-R-R-E-N. Okay, so we pulled up Martha Perrin by putting in her name, which I happen to know, and we've got a public link tree. Now we're going to look at Martha's record, which I can get by learn more, or I can click on her name. Okay. And now what I want to do is look at shared matches. So shared matches tells me who in my database is related to Martha and shows up in hers. Well, my mother, that's good. David, that's good. Okay. Now, in looking at her tree, okay, okay, so this is her tree. Okay, I see she is descended from James Christian and Sarah Rice, who were my second great grandparents. Okay, now what's interesting is those names don't appear over here. I have to click on the arrow to go another generation back. And so I'm now another generation back. And here all of a sudden, there we have the Christian, Vaughns, James Christian, Sarah Rice. Their daughter, Mary Christian, married Thomas Ingle, I-N-G-L-E. Okay, so what do I do now? I am now aware that there's going to be people in the DNA base who may have the last name of Ingle who are relationships to me. So in addition to recording who she is and all the other elements, I will later on go back. Okay, and now what I want to do is I'll get rid of parent and I'm going to put in Ingle. So now what I'm looking for is people who may, okay, also have the same ancestry. Okay, and now I get a bunch of people. There's Martha. Okay, and I will tell you because I've done it, Roy Wells comes out of that same heritage. So this is a cheap way for me to suddenly find other people who may have the same.
Is this a Joyce Maynard that was married to, or that had the relationship with the person that wrote the novel?
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, Joyce Maynard was a writer.
Yes.
Okay, but there will be more than one Joyce Maynard in the world.
Well, that's why we asked. That's what I asked. That's what
Okay,
it is.
I'm going to go back to common ancestors here. And this is my DNA matches. I just want to illustrate something in a moment. So here's David. Note he's a 994. Okay. N.L. Ross, who we saw a few minutes ago, was a 281. So let's remember those numbers. Now I'm going to view another test. If you remember, I did my mother's test. That's Lucille Christian. And it would not surprise you to learn that she is related to her nephew, David, okay, who you remember was a 994 with me, and now 1703 with my mother, about double. And N.L. Ross, who was a 281 with me, is 597 with my mother. So does that all make sense to everybody? Okay. All right.
I have a question. When you look at the listing of segments, you know, the illustration that shows where the DNA, you know, is common, is it more likely that you would have a close relationship to someone that has a long matching segment versus someone that, but only one, whereas other people might have several segments, but the segments are highlighted.
The short answer, the short answer is, as a rule of thumb, you're correct. Okay, that doesn't mean it necessarily everyone who matches a long segment is closer than everyone who doesn't. Okay,
Thank you.
but as a general rule, that would be a correct statement.
Thank you.
Because it's less likely. Okay, we're now going to switch over to one of the Maynard tests. We'll go to my wife, because there's some interesting things here. So this is my wife's test, and I want to go down to Alan Zija. Okay, so just a second. I'm having trouble. I have a crib card here, and I'm having trouble maintaining it. So I can, there we go. Okay, so Alan Zija has a really high connection, 387, okay, but there's no tree. So how do I find out who Alan Zija is? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open him up, and I'm going to look at shared matches. So he obviously matches with my daughter, my wife's daughter. he matches with Ray Stack. Okay, Ray Stack turns out to be Raymond Stahoyak, okay, who changed his name to Stack. Okay, and I know this because of the genealogy. He is a half first cousin to my wife, okay, because her grandfather had 2 wives, her Polish grandfather. Okay, and here is Vincent. So my suspicion is Kanaset and Konarski, by the way, are simply different Americanizations of the same last Polish name. One family adopted Konarski when the man came over, one adopted Kanaset. Okay, so I know which branch he's likely connected to. So now what I'm going to do, okay, is classic Research 101. We're going to go to Google. Come on, George. Okay, I could do it here. We're going to Google, and we're going to look at Zija and Kanaset. Okay, that's one of the 2 names. And we find Sophie Zija's obituary. So you see what I'm doing to trace this family down? I'm using Google. I'm also going to use Ancestry, okay? And here I find that Sophie Zija, born Kanaset, beloved wife of Theodore, okay? And mother of Alan Zija. Are we there? Okay, so she is a Kanaset, and she would in fact be another child of the Kanaset branch of the family. Okay. Okay, so I'm going back to Ancestry now with any luck if I can figure out that. Okay, so Zija. Oh, these are the matches for these. Okay. So if I go back to Zija, okay, I can say, okay, I know who he is. I want to add a relationship. So in this case, I already have one, but I'm just going to show you how it would work. This is how you would correct a relationship. So first of all, he is the mother's side. And now it says, here are various things he could be. And there, sure enough, is half first cousin. But that's not what he is. Alan's actually a half first cousin once removed. Okay. And I confirmed that, and now I have it. And I added the note. Son of Sophie, half first cousin, once removed. Okay, so oh, and this is father's side, not mother's side, sorry. Sorry, father's side. No, it's not father's side. I'm sorry, it's Marie's mother. My mistake. Easy to get confused. All right, now we're going to do one more just to play around for a minute on how we look things up. Okay, I want to back to one of the Stoyaks. Let's do Vincent. Ray, Francis. I'm looking for, there's Vincent, okay. So he has an unlinked tree. So I'm going to click on his name. Okay. I can view his unlinked tree. So if I hit on the public tree with 5 names, there we show up with Josephine Konarski, who is on my database. So I don't have to go any further. I know what the relationship is. Okay. So I hope that's been helpful. We're going to go back to the show now. Okay, are we back on?
Yes.
Okay, here is one of my personal dilemmas. I have a document that claims that Mary Ligon is my 4th great grandmother. There's not a lot of evidence to support that, but it comes from a period of time in Virginia when a lot of the records, particularly for the counties these people are in, were destroyed. Her father was John Ligon, we know that. And the fact of the matter is, I've only got one, I've had 89 DNA links through Mary and 1 through John. That's not very encouraging that Mary was actually the daughter of John Ligon. We don't know Mary's last name for sure. And I'm going to compare that to Darby Smithard. Those of you who've been around for a while know that my second great grandfather, Joel Martin, was born illegitimately, and we have determined who his father and mother actually were by DNA analysis. So we determined that his father was Darby Smithard. Got it? Well, Darby had 5 other kids once he got married. This was the one he had out of wedlock. He may have had others out of wedlock, but okay. And take a look at this. I have 40 matches through my own great grandfather. I have 6 through John, 13 through William, 2 through Lewis, and yet more. So give me a break. That's almost certainly my true 3rd great grandfather because of all these other lines. Now, Ancestry will give this to you in what they call the through lines database. You can also construct this data yourself. Okay, so when you find a relationship, check and make sure it makes sense. Make a note, helps when you're checking out what's going on. Consider contacting certain individuals who are more recent. They might even have pictures. I've got pictures of Marie's Polish grandparents, okay, at a Stoyak wedding. Update your own tree to include the individual and enter this in your DNA database. What is your DNA database? This is mine. And if that doesn't blow your mind, okay, I've been doing this for, as we've said, almost 15 years. But what I do is for every DNA link I've got, I put the family name of the person belonged into that is the link, the first name, in this case Levi, the name of the person who is the connection, whether it was through Ancestry, Family Tree, or 23andMe, how much DNA was shared, what chromosomes it was on, okay, and what child it was through. So that Eldridge Lilly was a descendant of Levi AG by Levi's daughter, Susanna. Okay, and I can construct pretty complex databases out of this. Now, if you're doing DNA, you will run into the potential for non-paternal events. It is said that 3% of all births are non-paternal. That includes adoptions, both formal and informal. And by informal, it would not be uncommon if the mother died young for an uncle or a cousin to take in the child and bring the child up as their own. But in many cases, 18th century, 19th century, there was no formal adoption as we think of it today. There are illegitimate births like the one with Darby Smithart when there was no father. Illegitimate births are sometimes claimed by another mother. Usually that would be a grandmother or aunt. And that what happened in the case of Joel Martin was in fact, his parentage was claimed by his grandparents. And then there are, of course, births during marriage where the biological father is not the marital partner. So just be aware of those. If you get to get some really funny data, be prepared to examine it. So we talked about finding other people's trees. One of the frustrations of DNA analysis is you'll find you have this person with a great link, like Alan Zija, and you have no idea who they are. So you check family trees, you message them. If you can get a connection, okay? So for example, I could easily say to Alan Zija, okay, gee, you matched my wife's Polish ancestors. Are you in fact related to the Konarskis or the Kanazets? Okay, he'd be much more likely to respond to that than he would if I just sent him a message that said, can I see your tree? Can you put your tree on? Sometimes their code names appear in other places and are worth searching. And you can build your own tree. More than once, you'll find what you have is a tree that only goes back to somebody's parents, but you can build the tree yourself. So hopefully that's been useful. Am I still sharing?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to stop sharing and open up for anything anybody wants to do. Help.
That was terrific, George. I had no idea I could learn so much from all of that. I mean, that there was all that information available.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
George, Diane.
Yeah.
So when I did my DNA, it was just in like November, and I did it through a lesser known company called CRI Genetics. It's out of the UK. Right. So, and it turns out, only do origin and like timeline, and your ancestral timeline and origin. I thought I was going to start getting all these, matches and stuff. So I emailed them and said, as your database builds, will that occur? And they said, no, we aren't going to do that. So I now know, origin, ancestry origin, but should I do a DNA test with another one of these companies, or is there a way to do what I've already done and get it to one?
Okay, Family Tree DNA and MyHeritage both accept other companies' DNA.
Okay.
So the first thing to do is see if you can download your DNA from this company.
Okay.
Then you can upload it to those two companies. You can also upload it to a company called GEDmatch, GEDmatch. And GEDmatch doesn't do DNA tests, but collect all sorts of DNA data and do genetic matching.
Gotcha. Okay.
Matching. I would say, however, I would keep my eyes open, and the next time Ancestry has a $59 test, I just go ahead and do that.
Just do it. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Neither
if I
Ancestry and 23andMe do not accept others. In the case of 23andMe, it's because they actually do a different test.
Okay.
Because they're looking for those genetic markers.
Right.
So if you think about it, they have some other things they're looking at.
Okay.
But Ancestry is just, forgive me, we're a commercial company worth over $1 billion. And, and just to follow up further for a moment, MyHeritage is as a particular company, features more links with people who have submitted DNA tests but currently live in Europe. So if you're interested in finding matches with people who come from your grandparents' region of Poland, okay, MyHeritage is more likely to give that to you.
Okay, thank you. So if I can't tell on the homepage of CRI Genetics, I could email them and say, is it possible for me to download the DNA result, right?
I would think that would make sense, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I mean, the reason I picked them was because they're not a huge company and I felt a little concerned about privacy. So,
Well,
but now.
I think privacy is by definition an issue here, and we all know about the issue as it relates to criminal forensics. Okay, and you do a DNA test. There's a certain amount of you're putting your family's DNA available, but let's also recognize if you don't, someone else is going to anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got a quick question.
Let me answer Steve's first. Steve had one on the chat. Steve said he's been getting DNA matches and they is a first cousin, but they're actually nieces and nephews. And the answer is you simply want to make the correction. Okay. All that's happening here is the amount of link is analogous. It doesn't mean they know what the relationship is. Okay.
Any chance that you're related to Louise Crummy McKinney, who was a suffragette in Canada?
Really, it goes back how far? But my family came into Virginia in circa 1650, and it's Virginia and west. Kept moving. Okay.
All right.
Any other questions?
George?
Yes.
Hey, George, this is Alan Cafton. I've got a question for you. Well, first of all, you made the comment that 23andMe got its start, you know, in the, somebody else talking? Oh. Anyway, 23andMe got its start doing the health-related things, and people are much less likely to respond to you to inquiries about ancestry and relationships. And I found that to be very definitely true, that more people respond on ancestry queries than do the 23andMe. But one thing I've noticed, though, is on Ancestry, somebody where they say predicted, you know, first to second or second cousin, second to third, I can identify an awful lot of my cousins, either that I knew or that I then queried and found, yes, they were. But I find a much lower hit ratio on 23andMe. They'll say, here's a whole bunch of second cousins, and I only found a couple of them that I really know for sure. Are their algorithms that different?
Well, there's a whole bunch of complications on the algorithms. Let me give you a couple. There's a whole topic we have talked about, which is endogamy, which relates to families that come out of heritages where there has been significant intermarriage. And one of the common ones is the Ashkenazi Jewish background. Another common one is Canadian, by the way. Another common one is Appalachian, which is part of my background. But in those cases, Ancestry corrects for the fact that you may have more DNA up than is correct for the relationship. 23andMe, on the other hand, I don't think they have as sophisticated an interest in the genealogy side. So they're just going to be pulling general numbers. However, they have some very good analytical methods for those cases where they do have a link. And I have found that if I'm pretty diligent about trying to ask people what the possible relationship is, when I'm enough to ask the question in a informational way. In other words, I believe you may be related to, that I quite often will get a response. By quite often, maybe half the time in Ancestry and a quarter of the time in 23andMe.
Okay, thanks.
Just recognize people, both companies have different reasons for existence. Okay, what else? Anybody questions? Okay, next we are going to tackle English and European research. Okay, again, very high level. Okay, but just if you have ancestors who came from England, Europe, we're going to cover in more of a what I would think of as a 3,000 foot level, because there are too many countries. England is pretty straightforward, but complicated. And of course, if anybody wants to ask about Ireland, I'll probably say they aren't a continent, so I won't answer any questions. Ireland has particular problems. Nancy and Pete. Nancy.
George, when we do England, will you talk about the different levels of record keeping in terms of, I think some of the, they don't even call them parishes, but there's different cities, counties, etc., that are different than American subdivisions of those things.
Yeah. And I think you've hit one of the keys when you get back to English and European search. You have to understand the nature of the division of the information. I mean, in many countries, the basic information is solely in the church. Okay. If you had ancestors in France and Poland, the church records were the first line of defense, and the government records were basically taken from the church record. So you really, to understand your ancestors, you have to get down to understanding what parish they may have been in, and what branch of their of whichever religion. Peter, did you have a question?
Just first of all, thanks. This was very, very well explained. Is there a way to review your slides and this talk? I know you're recording it. Is that available to us, or?
Both the slides and the recording will be available on the website in a couple of days after I figured out how to get everything downloaded. I'm traveling with a sophisticated Chromebook computer, but it doesn't have all the capabilities my home computer has. Right. And the club website is Oakmont, GEN, OakmontGenClub.org.
Thank you so much.
And there, once you get there, it has something that says recent presentations. Okay, thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Thank you,
George.
George.